So, hello and welcome to another episode of Coaches Revealed. I don't know how to call those recordings. That's why I'm sharing something different every time. Bear with me as we're creating those. But today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, colleague, coach, somebody who is in the trainings that I do and that I learn from and exchange with. We're in a mastermind together, a group of very committed coaches creating excellence in our business. I think that's kind of what we're combined by, or what connected us. And I asked Peter to be sharing with us today his experience in building his coaching business. Those recordings that we do here are really meant for the community, are really meant for the space to get the education that sometimes we have, or other coaches that build a successful business have the experience that they have, to make that available for everyone in the community and to have some resources or guidelines maybe that we can learn from. I have found it tremendously helpful to have some people who have walked the path share from their experience. Peter McCammon is somebody who built a very successful business in my eyes, kind of a short period of time since you started working with Ankush. And before I go in there, I just want to share one thing about you and kind of my experience of you and who you are for me. So I know Peter since I think it's about 2 years that we kind of first connected somewhere. Yeah. And the more I got to know you, the more I got to know a person who is so determined with the choices that you make. There's not a lot of second guessing yourself. There's not a lot of doubt coming up in terms of once you decide something, you just go for it. And I've witnessed Peter training physically, and I felt like an old dude next to this guy. So that's kind of the level you're dealing with. And Peter, you're a business coach. You work primarily with small business owners and medium-sized businesses, as I think. And tell us, like, anything that I missed that you want to charm in. You have a beautiful wife, you have children, brothers. We just talked about you connected with them. Maybe some of the background that I missed.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say family is probably the most important thing in my life. So I'm married to Julie, who you know, Moritz. My wife, Julie, was recently on a retreat that Moritz ran. And we've been married for coming up on 32 years. And we have two kids. Our son is 28. And our daughter is 27. So they're growing up and they're away from home, but they're still a big part of our lives. We're very strongly connected, even though we're not all together. I am a coach. I've been working full time as a coach since about October 2020. That's when I hired Ankush. And prior to that, for the probably 5 years prior to that, I had done a little bit of coaching and a little bit of psychotherapy. I trained as a psychotherapist back in between 2007 and 2009. And so I volunteered and then worked as a therapist privately for a number of years up until 2016, and then started to get into coaching. And prior to that, I'm going backwards, I had a burnout experience in 2006 that ultimately led me to leave my first career, which was in retail. And that was, the environment was a family business. And I worked with my dad, my mom, my two brothers. We ran a business that, and we ran and built a business. My dad acquired the business in the late 1960s. He had three sons. We all came into the business in the early 1990s. And when I left the business in 2008, there were about 25 stores across Ireland. And there were probably between 400 and 500 people employed within the stores. So it wasn't a big business, by kind of large corporate standards, but it was a sort of a decent sized local retail operation. And so, that's a little bit about my history and my family.
Great. And that's also kind of the businesses that you work with today, right? That's kind of the size of the business, maybe some smaller, maybe some bigger.
Yeah. My clients are mostly owners, directors, founders of small, medium-sized businesses. I mean, that could be as small as, 2, 3, 4 employees, or as large as several hundred. And so I suppose those are environments that I'm drawn to because I kind of understand them. I don't necessarily understand the industry or the sector, but I understand the scale, and I suppose I have experience of working in a business that size where you can't just be kind of good at one thing. You can often have to wear multiple hats. And so whether that's, business development, and you've also got to handle the admin or the account side of things, or or whatever that is. There's multiple aspects to running a business, no matter how small or large it is. And I guess the bigger the business gets, the more specialized an individual can become. In small, medium-sized businesses, you've got to be either really good at certain things and also competent at others. So I guess that's just, I've experienced that world, 20 years in an environment like that. So I suppose I bring experience to my coaching because of that. And so clients can come with lots of different, sometimes they want to build their business, sometimes they're struggling to build it, sometimes there are cultural issues, sometimes it's relationship issues. I've one client that came to me. He had the initial conversations were all about a relationship that he had with a member of his board and challenges that he was having in that area. So people come with lots of different challenges that can come up for any individual in a small, medium-sized enterprise.
Great. I want to come back to that part where you talk about your experience with those business leaders, owners. But before we go there, I would love to hear a little bit about your journey of building your business. I think many people that are listening or watching those recordings are aspiring coaches with a little bit of experience, coaches that look towards growing their business. And what we stand for, I know we exchange around this, is like building your business through service, building your business in an ethical way, not trying to manipulate people into it, not trying to, use a lot of advertisement in a sense of ad spends, or maybe like promoting in other ways. It could be, right? I think we are open for what works, so many of the coaches out there, but I know you've built your business in a certain way. It would be curious to hear about where did you start, and then what was your stepping through those areas and kind of the learnings along the way?
Yeah. I guess, if I go back to 2016, when I first trained, I suppose I managed to pick up some work largely just through connections that I have and people that I knew from my past in business. And I probably only ever had a few clients at that stage. And then, I picked up little bits and pieces through word of mouth as well. But the bulk of my business during that phase of my life was mostly still therapy. And then 2020, whenever the pandemic arrived and face-to-face work, in-person work became not possible in Ireland, I very quickly had no work. So during that, I suppose the first half of 2020 was a period of reflection and a lot of reading, a lot of studying. Came to a decision that I wanted to work full-time as a coach. And during that period, I came across Ankush, and that was partly because of I'd come across an understanding called the 3 principles, which fascinated me and had started to impact how I saw the way things worked and the way the world works, the way certainly my mind works, actually. And that was also, that coincided with me beginning to read some of the books that Steve Chandler had written. And I read some of his material and discovered that Ankush had a connection with 3 principles and also connection to Steve Chandler. He was a client of Steve's. And I had, at that time, I was also thinking about hiring a coach, and it just seemed like Ankush was the perfect person for me. And this was before I spoke with him. And then I met him, and it just made sense for me to work with Ankush. And I've been working with him since at a fairly intense level, which has meant I suppose I've gone, what for me is all in, where I've received almost weekly coaching from Ankush since late 2020. I've been on 4 of his immersions. I've been on one of his AJC career coaching schools. And so I've really, I guess, committed to a path of creating a practice, and I suppose really believed in the approach that Ankush has taught me, that he has modeled for me, that is a service approach, which, I really started with him. When I started with him, I had, I think, 2 clients. And he got me to begin to fill my calendar with conversations. That was the first, and in fact, it was really the only objective in the initial months that I worked with him, was to fill my calendar with conversations. And, I had lots of questions around, well, what does that mean? And who do I speak to? And who would want to speak to me? And, all sorts of kind of uncertainty around this. But gradually I suppose I acquired some skills in having conversations with people and being able to, I suppose, get a sense of whenever something was going on in that person's life that I might be able to help them with. And then I would invite them into another conversation where, if they were interested, where they could experience me as a coach. So I learned, I suppose, an approach to having conversations to creating conversations, then having further conversations that ultimately led to me being able to, I guess, enroll clients. So for 6 months, there was a lot of hard work went into me trying to understand this whole service approach to conversations and to enrollment. And to be honest, not very much happened in the first 6 months. I think I maybe took on 2, maybe 3 clients during that first 6 months with Ankush. In fact, I've told him a number of times, if I had just hired him for 6 months at that stage, I don't know if I would have continued based on the result at that stage. And I had hired him for 12 months. And between month 7 and month 12, I filled my practice. By the time I got to the end of 2021, I don't know exactly how many clients I had, but for me, I count anything 16 is, I'm going to say I count 16 as full. It doesn't mean I'm at full capacity, but if I'm at 16, I'm kind of, that's busy. I can accommodate 20. 20 is absolute capacity. So what I have found is that once I got to that point of having 16 clients or more, I just kept having conversations with people who weren't clients as well. And what that generated for me was the possibility to have people that were ready to work with me once people either didn't continue or a gap came up for whatever reason. I mean, it's when I hear myself sort of describe this to you, it's pretty simple. It is a simple approach, but I've found it pretty effective.
Right.
I haven't been below 16 clients since the end of 2021.
Wow, that's powerful. It's powerful. It's called the full practice with no end.
Yeah. Well, that's the hope. I mean, I guess and there have been times when I've sort of thought, oh, there's 3 or 4 people coming up to an ending, but it seems like, I thought, oh, is there going to be a big gap? Am I going to have to, is there going to be a while before I'm full up again? It hasn't happened. I've just stayed in conversations, and it just seems that, people emerge and
right.
Conversations happen. And I think that, Ankush has taught me that, the phrase, and we I guess we learned this together, probably the term oversubscribed, which is full practice, and you have people that want to work with you. And what I found with that is it just feels like a sweet spot to have my practice, because I suppose what I've found is that's a great position to be in to test increasing my fees. I mean, I've played with that a lot. I mean, during the second year working with Ankush, I have probably increased my fees maybe 5 or 6 times and doubled them over a period of 12 months, and probably doubled them between the end of 2021 and 2022, and I've probably increased them a couple of times already this year. And I guess I'm always looking for that point when, there's loads of resistance to my fees. And, from time to time that happens, but broadly speaking, that hasn't happened. And I think that's in part, I think people question that sometimes. I remember having a conversation with my tax accountant, and I made some kind of statement to him. I said, I'm hoping to double my business next year or something like that. And he kind of looked at me and said, how are you going to do that? He just didn't. And I said, well, I'm just going to increase my fees. He just didn't, he didn't believe me. I did. So I think, I guess that's my maybe too long an answer to your question, Moritz.
I don't think so. There are a couple of things in there that I just want to highlight. Like, one is that you mentioned, and this is something like when I work with a coach, when I talk to a coach, this is really the first thing that we want to increase is the amount of conversations, right? Like how to get in conversations. And then the second question comes up like, okay, just any conversation or not? It's kind of building skills. It's like you build the skills of having conversations, creating conversations. You build the skill of enrolling people into the next conversation.
Yeah.
And I sometimes feel like the only job we would have in holding ourselves accountable as a business owner, like if I put my business hat on, right? Yeah. And here's the coach, Moritz, and now I have the business hat on, and I say like, okay, so Moritz, this is what I want you to do as an employee, is really like keep having those conversations. That's one thing I heard you say also, like you are full, but then still while you're full, you're going to keep having some space for having continued conversations with other people. So that doesn't run out, because otherwise we fill the practice and then for whatever reason, 4 people end and they don't continue and I'm in a gap. But I'm like, oh my God, what do I do now? And I find going back to the basics, having conversations has always been the answer.
Yeah.
And another thing I found interesting, and it's an idea that Ankush shared with us, like when is full for you? What is full for you? And you shared your number of like 16
Yeah.
clients, right? And for me, for example, that number is a different one because I have a different coaching business model than you do. And we talked about this, I think, one time. Like you really work one-on-one with people.
Yeah.
I have group programs that I run. I have retreats.
Yeah.
And I have this broadcasting media on social media thing going, right? So for me, the number is lower.
Yeah.
When I have that, I'm at capacity. And sometimes I found that people think they need to have like, I don't know, hundreds of clients lining up and they're being drawn into messages they get by saying like, I'm going to get you 30 leads a month. If I hear that, I'm like, what do I do with 30 leads? It's way too much. Like I can't even handle that.
Yeah.
So what's been your experience with kind of like the amount of people that you had to talk to create that, to kind of have those continued conversations?
Yeah, I probably don't have a number, but, you know, so, I mean, right now I probably have, you know, I've a couple of proposals out with people. And, you know, one of those looks like one of the people I've proposed to has come back to me and said, hey, I want to press forward with this. And I've set up a meeting next week. I'm in conversation with probably 3 or 4 other people right now who are potential clients. And there are times, I mean, there was probably earlier in the year, there was a point in time, maybe February, March time, I was in conversation with maybe, I think there was 10 different conversations were ongoing. And so, you know, that ebbs and flows a little bit, but that's just part of my business. You know, who can I have a conversation with? And you know, I recently kind of restarted a conversation with a number of former clients. I had an opportunity to go to Phoenix recently and met with Steve Hardison. And there are a number of my clients who I worked with last year who I know are really interested in that. And so I know there are conversations in the offing with maybe 4 or 5 clients that I worked with last year, and don't know where that will go, but you know, so that's very much on my radar right now. So it's not loads, but it just varies. And I suppose a big part of this is that what I'm finding when I started with Ankush in the first year, it was almost all of the people who signed up with me were signing up for like 3 months. And like it was nobody was interested in 6 months. And gradually that has changed. And I think the more I have coached people and the more I have been coached, the better I have become at being a coach, because I have brought a lot of my conversations with clients to Ankush, my coach. And I think that availability of conversations for me with him to talk about the work that I'm doing with my clients and the amount of coaching that I'm doing, I'm a better coach. And right now I think I have 6 or 7 clients who are now 12-month clients. So when I have 12-month clients and people who renew, there's not as many gaps to fill. I don't have to work as hard to fill gaps. So the better I've become as a coach, the less I've had to kind of really focus on those conversations. But I've never stopped doing that. It's become probably not less of a priority, but an equal priority, but not having to have just as many conversations with people who aren't clients as I used to.
Right. So when we go back to kind of the pre-having a full practice stage, and you think about setting up those conversations, what did you look for that seemed to work for you when you were setting up conversations with people? Because I'm guessing like some of the people listening to this, they don't have a full practice.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose some of that was, you know, one of the things I did was I went to my brothers and I spoke to them, and I did some coaching with one of them. I said to them, who do you know that would be interested in this? And they ended up giving me a number of names. And so I had them kind of contact those people and say, hey, would you be interested in a conversation? And here's what Peter does. And, you know, I got some conversations through that. I found that I've had some, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but I have had a couple of clients who have been incredible at referring, you know, me to other people. I have one client who is a gym owner. He's now my PT, and I did some work with him in 2021. We did 6 months together. Didn't know, 6 sessions over 3 months, and he has referred, I don't know how many people to me, but, you know, maybe 6 or 7 or maybe even more than that. I've had so many conversations with people because of that. And so I have a really specific approach to that and this is something I learned from Steve Chandler. Whenever somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've somebody I I think would be good for you to have a conversation with, or somebody I think I'd love them to speak with you. And I'll really I'll take time and enroll them in that. I'll take the time with the person that wants to make the referral, and I'll ask them lots of questions about the person that they think should come to me. And I'll say, look, what are their challenges? What are their problems? Why do you think it would be a good idea for them to come to me? What do you think they would gain out of it? What do you think would be different in their life if, they came and that worked out really well? And when they answer those questions, then they're perfectly prepared for my next question, which is, will you go to them and tell them what you think they have to gain by speaking to me, and have them call me, have them email me, have them lift the phone to me? And what I found with that is it changes the nature of the referral. The referral is not just somebody ringing kind of cold to me with where somebody said, hey, I think you should speak to Peter. It's like they have gone and said, look, here are the reasons I think you should speak to Peter, and here's what I think you can get out of this. And will you call him? And I find that a really powerful way to involve the person that wants to make the referral in the referral, so that I don't end up making a cold call to somebody that doesn't really know me.
Right.
So that's been something that I'm pretty, anytime I get somebody that says to me, hey, would you speak to somebody? I go through that process.
Right. Which makes a lot of sense. My personal, you could call it, approach has been to ask them to set up a meeting and maybe like tell them why they want us to be connected. So I have like a Facebook message where my client or whoever is referring somebody to me is sharing that, and I talk with them about it. But that's like asking all those questions is something I'm going to take from this call. That's
Great.
very powerful. Very
Yeah,
powerful.
yeah. Well, I got it off a master, so it's not my invention, but it's great. That can really work. You just slow it down in that conversation. That can really set the referral up for a much more powerful first conversation.
Right. Cool. Peter, if there's somebody listening to this and they're interested in, especially the space that you're working in, with owners, with leaders, small, medium-sized businesses, what would be, let's call it, your 3 best tips for them to start operating in that space?
3 best tips. Well, I guess, I suppose something I'm just thinking about that in the context of myself is, for me, the reason I went into that kind of area was because of my past, and I had an experience. So it made sense to me to do that. So, well, I guess it's back to, in a sense, what I said. If you want to do that, find a way to connect with people who are in that space. I mean, I know some people who have created great connections through with people in that space through sort of like networking organizations like BNI, for example. I mean, I've never used that, but I know people who have utilized that as a means to get into conversation. I'd say anything that gets you into conversation. I've shared this with you before. I mean, I've done some work with somebody that does lead generation as well, which is more speculative. And yeah, that was something I experimented with, or have continued to do. And I have some clients through that. And so I suppose I use that to target people who are operating in businesses of a specific size. I think that is, that's probably the sort of service I would only recommend that probably to somebody that has a reasonable amount of enrollment experience. If I was doing it again, I would probably leave it a bit later than I did. I went in it was an enrollment school for me, and it paid off. But if I was doing it again, I think I would have been better off to had more enrollment experience before I actually took that on. So I think get into conversations. I think don't worry about a niche. I mean, I have people in retail, fire and flood restoration, engineering, tech, health, fitness, real estate, charities, and agri-food consultancy, recruitment. If you want to go into that kind of scale of business, I don't worry about a niche. Anybody that's in business, they're dealing with the same kinds of problems: leadership issues, loneliness, stress, risk of burnout, juggling. How do I, finance, marketing, and do the work and all of these things? So, cast the net wide, I would say. And a third thing is, I mean, if you really want to do it, just do it, but stay on the path. Don't give up on it. It's if I had judged my first 6 months with Ankush as the basis for deciding whether or not to continue trying to work with people in small, medium-sized enterprises, my decision would have been to pull away from that. My decision I would have come to the conclusion, oh, that's obviously not working, or that hasn't worked, or I'm not cut out for that, or some other, I don't know what it would have been. But so stay with it, persevere, decide what you want to do. And I think what I know is, in any business, some businesses can take off overnight, but my experience is that is not the norm. What I've, on any kind of reading that I've done, I read a great book in the past it's called Good to Great by a guy called Jim Collins, and he did research on businesses. Now, these are large businesses that hit kind of what he would call excellence, that they outperformed the market massively. And, people hadn't kind of heard of these businesses until they kind of exploded. But what seemed to be a truth was these businesses had been churning away for maybe 5, 10, 15 years before that, trying to work out how to make their business work, to create they trying things, failing, trying other things, failing, honing their expertise, and then got to a point where it was like it took off. And so, yeah, persevere, get on the path, commit to it, stay with it.
Powerful. And what you said last, it really charms into the experience that I had. I mean, I think I made something around 30,000, 40,000 in my coaching business the first 3 years, like from getting my first client, which was while I was in my coach training, to 3 years later, that was probably like around 30,000, 35,000. And then making 6 figures in 1 year. And people looked at that 1 year and thought like, oh my God, how is he doing that? It's like crazy. Oh, I should be doing better than I did. And looking at other coaches, and you see those big numbers maybe. But any coach that I talk to, like yourself, or other people that I talk to, they had a training period before that started to take off. So I think it's great for people to hear that perspective, especially around business, and not only about the coaching world, but any business. It's more common to have people be in the business between 5 and 10 years before something big happens, rather than like the 1 year and I was rich stories.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, and it's not the norm. It's definitely not the norm.
Yeah. Well, Peter, it was great to have you on the show, however we're going to call it. If you have ideas for the show, let me know. And I want to know, where can people find you if they want to connect with you? If a leader with pressing issues wants to have a conversation, or somebody looking to grow their business, how can they find you? How can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Peter McCammon, my name on the screen. If you search, my name is not very common. I'm based in Northern Ireland, so if there are others, I'm the one in Northern Ireland. And I'm also, well, my email is peter@pm-coaching.co.uk. Peter McCammon on Facebook, and that email address. Those are the best ways to connect with me.
Oh, Peter, thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your experience and sharing what has been useful to you. As this knowledge gets out there, we're hoping that the coaching industry starts picking up speed more than it already has, and people are actually having a good time building their business. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that would be great. It's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite, Moritz.
Most welcome.